Hello and welcome to Nerdarchy, for nerds by nerds. I am Nerdarchist Ted, and today I'm joined by a special guest to talk about an awesome Kickstarter board game that's going on. So, without further ado, sir.
Hey guys, I'm Christopher Dravis from Ironrise Games. You can definitely find us on Facebook at Ironrise. You can find us on Kickstarter as well if you search for the game. Thanks for having
Oh,
me, bud.
absolutely. For those of you are out there, know that Ted likes board games, and Chris is, I've already, discussed with you. I've been a fan of Steampunk for quite a while. So, on the Kickstarter page, down in the description below, you can go check that out, jump right to it, back it. It's already fully funded, so there's no worry about, oh, am I going to get it or am I not? It's there. It's just right now totally about how many stretch goals that we're going to get to in the next few days. So, there's a little bit of lore. So it sounds like you created the world or the concept of this before you got into the game. So you want to go into that at all?
Yeah, absolutely. So this world kind of came about really because of a move I made from the suburbs of Chicago to Chicago, where I kind of started gaming with a new group of friends, and we created a kind of steampunk setting that I managed as the game master in this world of Spirel. We played in that for about 2.5, 3 years, and then we happened to go to a local gaming convention here in Chicago, and we came back from that, and we realized we've been consumers of RPGs and board games and that for so long that we just decided let's be creators, let's make something, and we decided to take that world that we've been RPing in for so long and turn it into this board game that anybody can kind of consume.
And that is really cool. Seeing something on one level, one plane of existence, if you want to totally D&D term it, and then say, oh, well, we're going to transform this into something else. I think that is really cool. Like to me, there's so much lore and data that I've dumped or lost over the years with different worlds that I've
Mm-hmm.
created, with the Nerdarchy crew and outside of that. It's like, I wish that I could have done more or done something with that. And to see, here is like, all right, now you're going to take this rock solid thing that you did for years and say, all right, let's make this be a thing. How much of a struggle was that to be like, oh, I need to limit how much of this stuff I can get in.
It's an intimidating process in the very beginning, especially as the storyteller trying to take it from this group of like 6 or 7 people that it was for in the beginning, and then turn it into like a mass consumption kind of product. One of the immediate things that always comes to mind is like you'll have these characters who were villains in the RP that now you need to translate to the board game, and you have to make them balanced because players can select them, right? So like somebody that's a super intimidating, powerful villain, you have to tone down in a way to make it like equal to somebody else that a player might select to play. So it's good to have other people involved in the process to help you balance that, because otherwise, as the storyteller, I would just run away with it and make a completely unbalanced game where certain people always win because they're just more powerful. But that doesn't sell copies. So,
All right. So speaking of the game, why don't you, for
yeah,
those people who aren't familiar with the Kickstarter, who haven't been following it for the last several weeks, why don't you give everyone a brief intro into the world, the game, and convince them of why they should own this copy.
sure. So, Spirel itself is it's steampunk sort of diesel punk setting, but it's a very dystopian kind of world. It hinges on themes like fascism, the occult, tyranny. Those are kind of the major playing themes that are happening in there. The game itself pits a team of heroes and a team of villains against each other, so it's easy team, cooperative in some sense, but someone will tip the balance of good or evil in this world, and that's going to be done by accomplishing, for the heroes, their heroic endeavors and their side quests. For the villains, it's the accomplishment of their evil schemes and their torments, which is their version of a side quest. And somebody is going to earn enough victory points to tip the balance. And that happens in our game kind of via a unique mechanic called the challenge. Our game, from the onset, we wanted to create something that didn't use dice. We didn't like the randomness of that. So it's really a deck of cards. The heroes have their heroic assets, the villains have their villain assets, and it's about managing that hand of cards. Do you use your hand of cards to enhance your character? Do you use it during the challenge to overcome your opposition and get the win effects? To hold on to it till somebody else's turn to mess with them? So there is tactical decisions being made there with what do you do with the resources that you're given. And during the challenge, it's very much almost like a mini poker game that happens there. So cards are laid face down. You have skill chips that you're using, and then you're trying to overcome what the other player might be putting down, or maybe the other player is just bluffing you out to get your good stuff. And then the reveal, and you find out who won or who lost that challenge based on certain factors that each challenge has. But really, what's happening is kind of a mini card game, mini poker game, and then using your cards how you choose during the rest of your turn.
Very cool. So, as a fan of steampunk, and we had kind of talked about this a little off camera of how welcoming steampunk is of basically every other genre, to most extents, and you've taken this to a dystopian level of steampunk, arcana punk, based on some of what you've said. How much of the steampunk angle of things gets into like more than just the art? Like, is there lore and it's just the mechanics that function in the world, or is there anything that you attribute?
Sure. So, when we approached it, the aesthetic that I kind of wanted to follow and everybody else was kind of on board with too was to make sure that stuff is functional. So we didn't want to go that route where we're just kind of like gluing cogs on stuff, which is cool. I mean, it's cool. It's whatever. But what we wanted was something that made sense, right? So we tried to tone it down in some ways. As far as like that level of like sort of gear punk that's happening. Um, but the majority of the setting, it doesn't really hinge on, I guess, anything sort of that a lot of steampunk does, which is like kind of positive speculative fiction. I think, somebody pointed out to me once that like a lot of diesel punk is kind of more where our aesthetic is, and it also the themes that pop up in that a lot are kind of these dystopian war, arcana, sort of sinister occult themes you find in a lot of that kind of material. So I think that's more where our stuff lies, and the steampunk elements are just accepted pieces of technology in the world rather than something that the characters focus on. So your phone is called a far speaker, and it just is what it is. You accept it. The airships and auto cars get you where you go. So the technology isn't really the star of the show. It's just the characters. The steampunk tech is really just it's an accepted piece of the
Okay,
world.
cool. So now you had made mention that the villains are an aspect of this game, as it's kind of a head to head kind of setup. But like, are you using villains from the campaigns that you ran? Did you have to
Yes.
make up any, or is it all things that were legit villains for the game?
Almost every character in the game, hero and villains, is somebody that popped up in our original 3 years of RP. Some of them, characters created by people. Some of them NPCs that I ran. The villains themselves, those are all people that I ran as the game master. There's a few that I had to create because we had so many people kind of coming out to be part of the game. Since we did like photo art for most of everything, a lot of people wanted to be part of it. So there's a few characters that I had to kind of create more or less on the spot. Jefferson Swan is one of them. He's in there, so that's somebody I had to kind of cobble together. But turned out to be a great, villain. And we had the Selena Cross is one of the fan favorite villains as well. That's actually a character that in the game was Sebastian Cross. He was an evil sort of wizard in there, but we had this actress who really liked the character a lot. So for the purposes of the board game, we just gender switched it and said it's Selena and go ahead and do your thing, you know. And she turned out to be great in that role. She did her own costuming and everything. So you know, there's minor tweaks that we had to make sure that we could get the right casting for everything. But yeah, yeah, it's all almost all of it is from the original RP.
That is really cool. I love, as I said before, I love seeing a creation, come and morph and twist into something new. It just that's just spectacular. So, what are you looking to do beyond Ironrise? Are we looking to, you looking like if clearly it's funded, so there's interest there. Are there any thoughts poking around the back of your head saying expansion or sequel or another game entirely?
Well, yeah, definitely, expansions. I've been putting down notes here and there. I kind of keep track of them on Iron Rise's World and page. So I keep a lot of notes there as to like who can I maybe develop into a character for the expansion. So expansions are first and foremost on our minds, and then maybe other genres after that. I mean, I have whole like fantasy settings that maybe deserve to be like an RP book for like some open gaming license or something like that, or maybe a board game or whatever. So there, my urge to create, it's been there for like the last 2 decades. So I love making things, making worlds. So there's definitely more I want to do. I think expanding on Iron Rise is probably first and foremost, but after that, who knows what
Well,
comes
I mean,
next.
if you don't mind, can we get into the actual, you're talking about a gaming book, and that you've been running
Yeah,
Spirel in, in the last over the last 3 years. Have you been running that with D
yeah,
and D or with a different rule set?
yeah, sure. So Spirel, I actually ran using so Genesis that came
Mm-hmm.
out recently is in a way that I used for that. But at the time, all that was out was the Star
Okay.
Wars book, the Empire. So we had ran like a couple games of Edge of the Empire, prior to me kicking this off. And the group that I wanted to game with, they all knew that system pretty well. So I said, well, let's just take Edge of the Empire's rules and that really cool like obligation system that's in there, and let's just use all of that for this setting. It works. There's not like a lot of magic that you're going to be dealing with. So let's just try that out. And everybody bid on it. They liked that system. It was great. And, we used that all the way through until we started developing the board game. And then once the board game started to kind of get rolling, I moved away from running that RP because it was just a bit much for me to develop the game and then be in the RP. So that's when I kind of switched over to doing Pathfinder and D&D and
Okay.
stuff like that.
So how difficult was it as a process? We have some friends that we game
Mm-hmm.
with that are board game developers that they've gone to unpubs and was it E2C2 or whatever, however you said it.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah,
you know, I'm not a game developer. I've tried to fiddle around with some things here, beginning of Nerdarchy and what have you, but nothing's ever made it past the four of us, the three of us now.
sure.
What was that process like?
It's tough. I think that the first piece of advice or information that I'd throw out there is just however long you think something's going to take, quadruple it. Everything just it's such a long process. But to me, I think what helps get you through that is having partners who have equal say in the game to like check each other, and also to have like very clear roles defined for people. So like I handle all of the creative. I have our partner Danny who takes care of all the physical production, and then we have Ed who takes care of a lot of the marketing and getting the word out. So that way everybody's kind of working on their own things and pushing each other. So like I can say, hey, Danny, where's our demo copies? Or Ed, what's the next thing on the calendar that we're doing? And they can come back to me and say, hey, I'm doing this promotional thing, but we need some art for it. So everybody is kind of dependent on each other, and we check each other. Like if I come up with some crazy rule for a character, and they'll tell me, hey, no, that's way too powerful. Like so, you need that kind of stuff. And then the play testing. For a game like this, a like asymmetrical like sort of strategy card game. a ton of play testing has to go into that because it's not symmetrical in the sense that everybody has the same character and the same deck and the same abilities. So you have to play test a character, and then you have to play test it against these other characters, and just keep swapping people in, seeing if weird broken combos come up, or if helpless against a certain combination on the other side. So the play testing aspect of this, we've been working on it for about 4 years, but like the game wasn't to the point of like done flawlessly until maybe about 9, 10 months ago. So it takes so long, and you go through all these iterations of what is the game going to be. Like ours started out with this idea that's very different from where it is today. So it's just throwing stuff on the table and seeing what sticks, and it's a lot of trips to Staples to buy supplies, a lot of cards that went into this game until it came to the
So
state
now,
that
was there a
it's
lot
in.
of
But
writing on cardstock in the card sleeves of, okay, this does this or that does that, and cross that out and handwrite this and instead? Was there a lot of that?
yeah, the original version of it is somewhere, but it's like cards in like purple and yellow sleeves, and they're like blank card stock that we ordered from somewhere, and there's marker markings all over it. And I guess another thing is like we did our in a way like a lot of board game companies do it the opposite way that we did it. We did our art and our photo stuff first. So like, we were able to crank out, a lot of like the finished images, but the rules weren't done. So you'll have these cards with beautiful images, but like all of their game text is like crossed out and scribbled out. And there's like, so we went through a lot of versions of that too.
I mean, having play tested a variety of games over the years that either have made it or have not made it yet or what have you. It's interesting to talk to developers and see, okay, what is the mindset? How long has this been going? Our friends Cardboard Fortress, the first game of theirs that they worked on, that literally the first time we met them was a game called Kobolds, and it was
Cool.
designed that you're retired adventurers, you're old and what have you, and you're in this town, and kobold warrens have sprung up, and you have to stop them from destroying the town. And it's supposed to be like a pandemic thing where it's really difficult to win, and the group of us that played numerous times thought it was a blast every time. Every time there was always feedback. There was always stuff. Anthony is sitting there taking notes on what we did and how our playthrough went. But for whatever reasons, it hasn't made it out there yet, and it kind of makes me sad because I was ready to buy it day one. But it's now been years since we've known them, and they've worked on other things that have made it, and they've had games that were on on Geek and Sundry, and it's fantastic to hear of success. Uh, you know, was this the only project that you worked on, or were there other things in the background beforehand?
I would say it's the only project we worked on, but the game started out so differently that like if we had pursued some of the original concepts for the game, it would be totally different. So I guess the art and the concept in the world remained the same, but the way the game was played changed at least 2 or 3 times pretty significantly. That those older versions would have been like completely different products. So yeah, so in a way, first project, but like different iterations, different death and rise of the phoenix, so to speak. It's a different creature every time we kill it, but we're on the final
So
version
you
of it
have
now.
do you have any kind of like notes to be like, okay, we've moved on, from this idea to that idea, so that if there's something out there that like one of you guys is like, oh well, I really like that, I don't want to completely lose it. Is there anything that's lurking back there that might see the light of day in an expansion, or any of that kind of stuff?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we have notebooks full of like playtest experiences and old notes and stuff like that. But there was something early on in the game, kind of called these tinker cards, where like you would get a card and have basically a list of different mechanics and different costs on there, and you kind of decide how it works. And that for simplicity was something that was cut at the time. But something along those lines may way back into an expansion. We're always looking at different rules and different ways to kind of manipulate the core set of rules right now that we could attach to characters and cards. So there's quite a bit of that out there, and there's quite a few things that were cut from different characters and different cards that I think could come back around. They made sense, but they made at the time characters and cards too bloated. So chopping pieces off to put elsewhere in the game down the road is definitely that'll make sense then.
Very cool. In regards to the setting, I read the
Mhm.
section that said, like, people awoke in Spiral without really knowing who they are, or like they know who they are, but that's all they know. Is that actually how you started your first game in this world?
So the game started uh, in the RP basically a generation after that. So everybody's parents were the first people to like wake up in this world, to start really forging it and settling it. So everything is very new. People would have heard stories about this sort of untamed world from like their parents prior. So I wanted that kind of feeling. I wanted it to be this unsettled sort of wilderness that characters could really dig into and know that they were probably the first people to see certain things, and discover little pieces of the past that aren't remembered. What was the past of this world before the first generation woke up. It ends up being a lot of horror elements, so they never discover anything that's great, but they start to piece various different things together. Realize civilizations rose and fell, and terrible disasters, great mistakes made by previous generations. So there's a lot of that element in there. But yeah, it was great putting that together. I liked that, and we ran with that for a long time. I think one of the most interesting things they discovered was kind of in the second campaign in that setting, where the heroes traveled to a place called the Scorch, this big desert south of the main city, and they discovered down there a duplicate version of the
Oh,
city they were from, just abandoned, empty, old, and starting to realize that maybe like the Ironrise that we live in wasn't the first Ironrise to be created. Maybe this thing has been happening cyclically for a while, So that was interesting as well, and they kind of delved into that, discovered sleeping machine empires, and it was good.
so we have our first question. If you guys do have questions, you can throw them up in the chat. Just put question beforehand. It says, do you have any advice on publishing a game, or any advice on making a more fluid setting?
Yeah, sure. So, with regard to like a more fluid setting, I mean, I guess it's kind of open to interpretation on what that may mean, but I interpret it as how do I cast the widest appeal, what works for the most amount of people, and ultimately that's one where you don't want to create too much information. You want to let people discover it rather than put it up front. So I mean, my advice there is definitely just give the kernels that you need to for people to discover and choose what's important for them and develop as they move along that path, because otherwise you end up doing a lot of work for yourself that people may not bite on. I mean, world building is fun and it's great, and if you enjoy that, do it for sure, but I like to develop things as the players kind of walk down that path, only because some of what they think or feel will influence how I write it. I want to make it meaningful for the people that are discovering it instead of just meaningful for me. So that's a piece of advice there for fluidity, is just have maybe 2 or 3 steps ahead. You don't need the whole path written out. You can do that as you go. And then advice for publishing. Just in general, you're going to need a lot of people around you. And I suggest having, one person, be that you or be that one of the partners, to be the physical production person. For me, that was my least favorite part. It was way too much math and logistics. So, but our partner Danny, he loves that stuff, and so he dived into it. And he started exploring different printers, different like how to ship. to different places, things like that, what the costs are, fulfillment centers. So there's a lot that goes into the actual publishing part of it and the production part of it. I mean, if there's some specific questions, I can certainly answer them, but just know that like that is a massive world full of information that there's no easy answer to. A lot of it is just going to end up being based on how many copies do you intend on printing, and then that is what's going to inform your ultimate decision. You know, there are great companies like Panda that have pretty decent numbers to fulfill with, that want like extraordinary amounts of copies to give you a reasonable price. So step one is just figure out how many physical copies are going to exist, and that's going to inform most of that journey.
If you open up any regular board game, like you've got the box, you've got typically some kind of insert, you've got all of the different components, and from my experience of backing Kickstarters and owning board games and talking to developers, like every single piece could be coming from another company, so you have to worry about getting all of these things together, getting it set just right. As you said, you've got the fulfillment angle, so if you don't have all of your ducks in a row and all of your cards lined up properly and potentially in a particular order, if that's something that's important, like all of these little nitty gritty details that one might not even consider, they are all just as important as everything else that goes into it. So
That's a great piece of advice too. Is like if you're thinking about making a board game, you have to consider your components. It's so important, and our partner Danny could go into that more. But you want to try and pick a printer that can handle every single one of your components, because if you have to have it printed from different companies, like maybe somebody's going to make this really cool like metal chip that you want in there, but then somebody else is going to do the cards. You need to have like now a third party be the fulfillment, who's going to piece everything together and put it in the box, and it's a nightmare. So just try and pick somebody who can do everything, and don't choose every option in the world and have it all shipped and built somewhere. So consider your components big time. I guess another good piece of advice there is do a lot of print and play stuff. Really get your components turned into like little alpha beta versions of it. You can go to like Ad Magic's like print and play stuff like that. Because you need to know how a lot of this stuff feels in hand, and what it's like to actually use it at the table, rather than just kind of like running to Staples and creating kind of like ad hoc versions of it. Definitely, invest in like professionally made beta versions, because that's what's going to help a lot of the play testers really give you their true insight into how the game feels.
so we have a question from World Anvil. What are your thoughts on Disney's Treasure Planet being an alt reality Steam/Atom Punk world?
Well, maybe that comes from Demetrius. I'm not sure. I mean, Treasure Planet is a very special piece of animated content. I love it. I can tell you that I don't take an official stance on that being turned into a setting, but I'm sure it has been. Everything that can be is on the internet somewhere. So, but yeah, no, I mean now that I think a little bit more about it, I mean steampunk in space is neat. Oh, I mean, I've mashed different genres together before. Like we were talking offline before. I mean, I ran a setting to the point where like it started in D&D fantasy, and through the years and different characters, like it advanced to like modern day, and then to the point where the world was ruined, and characters had to set off on magical spaceships to find somewhere else to settle Earth too. So, live the dream.
Yeah,
Do what
you had
want
said
to
that
do.
you had ran one setting for 17 years, and that's pretty darn impressive. I've been gaming with this group for more than 20 years, um, but like the settings have bent and twisted and moved and what have you. So it's totally a thing that you know maybe years down the road will Nerdarchy will be off in another dimension, and we'll have got 17 years worth of Chimes of Discordia, but we've got a long way
I
to
hope
go for
so.
that to happen.
There's nothing more rewarding than taking, a villain from who's the main villain from like 12, 13 years ago, and then the sudden reappearance of that person as the new main villain for a new set of characters. So definitely, if you get the opportunity, hunt your players with that.
But like I said, that's more than a decade away at this point. Because everything else that we've done, like yes, there's stuff from Olthgania, which now is the continent, and we've stolen and chopped apart a lot of that old world and brought that into Chimes of Discordia. It's just one of those things like it's not whole cloth moved. We're not using that because it like the only thing that was special about that is it wasn't as much about good versus evil. It was more of like a law versus chaos bent. And
For
with
sure.
us moving in new and interesting ways with our role playing, like we weren't as interested in the let's just play generic fantasy. So we wanted to make changes and say, okay, well, what is going to make this world stand out? And I mean, clearly, Spirel
Mm-hmm.
is I don't know if I'm pronouncing that right. Uh, like
Yeah.
clearly that's something that is way off the charts, different than the other things that are out there. Um, I mean, if you were using the awesome dice system of Genesis, or what was the Star Wars, I mean that's whole cloth, a whole nother ball of wax, and I applaud you for taking those first steps to go in that direction.
Yeah, no, thank you. I mean, it was fun to develop. I mean, I love world building. Just like for players, one of the most rewarding things is the moment of character creation, and that's session zero. And for game masters, we have our own kind of session zero with ourselves when we develop our world and really take the first steps into doing it. It just happens to take weeks and weeks instead of a single session zero. But it's fun. Creating a world is fun, and I think really the basis for any world just needs to be like what is the core of it and what is that slightly different thing that you want to make the focus of, because otherwise it's just kind of built on tropes, and that's not fun in the long term. But if you just take one interesting facet and expand upon that, and then there you go. And I mean, for us, for me, it wasn't anything I don't think super unique, but I just wanted to take the idea of like what would a world be like if you didn't know how that world happened. If you didn't know your history and you just happened to wake up, or your parents' generation was the first generation. Like, what is that like? And then I kind of attached the filter of steampunk, diesel punk to it, and we went from there. But that ultimately was an exploration theme. An exploration focus was discover this world that you're part of that you have no memory of how it happened.
So we have another question in the chat. Josh on Journey, how do you portray steampunk dragons? So there's another
Sure.
comment related to that. It's like I can't think of anything besides like a clockwork dragon or maybe like a train dragon. So do you have those in your setting? And if so, how did you wind up using them?
So I've used those a few times in both kind of our fantasy setting and certain things in Spirel too. And ultimately, like on the fantasy side, it was about dragons who had died or were suffering from disease or on their way out, and that was sort of their escape from that, escape from their injuries and whatnot, was to get these people to build clockwork bodies for them and transfer their consciousness to it. On the sort of Spirel side, we didn't have dragons per se, but we had some very large engines of destruction that were created by this sort of sleeping machine empire. And they were some of the first things to awaken. So, like, as people were exploring the setting, they're kind of tripping over this old empire that was the doom of multiple civilizations prior, and slowly starting to wake them up. And some of the first things they woke up, like in their very first setting,
Oh, did we?
one of the main cities, where they're all just going about their regular day, at this logistics company, when they hear this ear-piercing scream and the ground erupts, and this sort of draconic digging machine is now just starting to churn up the entire town and destroy everything in sight. And it's just, for the Machine Empire, that was just one of their things that they used to pulverize the land and make it ready for, new buildings to be put up. But for the people that were there at the time, it's this insane, indestructible Leviathan. So I guess that's how I kind of handle some of the large sort of fantasy things in the other setting, is I tie them to the dead civilization that came
Very
before.
cool. I love dragons, as any typical D&D nerd does. So it's cool to see these
Mm-hmm.
other takes on them, and people are you know making comments on that in the chat. Truemate didn't really list this as a question, but it says the silver ghosts sound pretty cool. Can you give any new information on those?
Yes. So the Silver Ghosts are, to a lot of the people in the setting, it's myth, it's lore, it's nightmare, right? In a lot of the abandoned, dead places of the world, you might encounter the Silver Ghosts, kind of cloaked in rags and tattered cloth. They have these long, metallic, sort of like flaying knife finger type things. Um, they are, in fact, part of the sleeping machine empire, slowly waking up. Those are pieces of machinery that are out there, hunting the people that are coming across the old sleeping machine empire's ruins, trying to make sure that none of these vermin, these infestation, get too far in there. So they're doing what they can to, you know, keep people away from the important bits. But again, for the regular civilians that live in this setting, it's a nightmare. They can phase through walls. They appear out of nowhere. They look like monsters, like specters, like whatever, and that's the lore around them. And if somebody really wished to capture them and study it, they might discover otherwise. But I really like the idea of taking something that is very mechanical and laid out, and putting it to a people that have no understanding of it, and letting that myth develop in the middle.
So with Spiral and this this awesome board game, whether it be the game or the setting, uh, what what aspect of it, what thing has happened, or what thing did you create that you are the most proud of with this whole project?
I mean, for me, the thing that I'm really proud of is like how big my friend circle has expanded because of this. I mean, the all the actors that we had, kind of come in to portray these roles. They are all, they were people from the like local like improv and burlesque and acting community and stuff like that. And we knew them sort of tangentially, but like as the project went on, there's a lot of them that I've come to know really really well. Some of them are now like permanent parts of my gaming circle, and so I think that's amazing. That my friend circle just blew up because I just wanted to turn a cookie into a board game, and that's great. I love that. So that's probably what I'm most proud of, is just the people that met along the
I can
way.
totally relate to that. Since doing Nerdarchy, my reach of gamers and gamers of quality have expanded to untold heights. We get to do these chats and connect with our fans, and for a lot of them, like they've really become friends. And
Yeah.
it's just awesome to just be able to connect and share this rich history, all because we decided to turn on a camera and record some videos.
Yeah, just to do the thing that you like doing, and then that has all these secondary benefits of increasing your friend circle, getting involved in other cool stuff. I'm involved in a lot of their cool projects now too, which is amazing. So it's awesome. It's just awesome. You take something you want and you move forward with it, and all these great people come out of the work.
Very cool. So it sounds like, based off of your stories and whatnot, that you spend more time behind the GM screen. Do you do playing as well, or are you one of those, I'm a GM?
I rarely get the opportunity to be a player. I like it when I can, when the opportunity crops up. A friend of mine, Logan, is running a Call of Cthulhu game that's on like its third session, which is awesome. I love that stuff. I would say that Lovecraft and Cthulhu is a lot of the inspiration for what I do. So it's very fun to be part of that. But the majority of the time, I am behind the screen, and with this project, I'm definitely kind of a behind the scenes kind of guy with the creative and stuff that's being put together. Although one of the characters that does exist, the fellow in the mask, the prime minister, that is me. I did play that part, so I am in the game masked, but I'm there.
Now you've mentioned, Call of Cthulhu, D&D, Star Wars, now Genesis. It sounds like
Yeah.
you play a lot of different settings or a lot of different systems, I should say.
Yeah, I guess, well, just role playing systems in general fascinate me. The way that people kind of develop a way to interpret the results of what you want somebody to do, like just a mechanic around real life actions. So I have so many role playing books and systems at home, and I just kind of like comb through those for inspiration. In addition to the ones you mentioned, I think Blue Rose is a super cool book that doesn't get enough love out there. The Star Wars Genesis system is brilliant, and I'm seeing a lot of people start to adapt that. That's a very cool community where they just put out Genesis, and now there's all these people just like working behind the scenes in kind of a fan way to build different settings out of that rule of how to build magic, how to build psionics, how to build all this stuff, just using the pieces there. So it's very like Lego brick esque. You could build it however you want it. I ran Pathfinder for probably the last 2 years, which is kind of a love hate relationship. It's a lot of my favorite, but boy, you can customize anything you want. You want a wizard that's great with a sword and shield, and the rules are there. And we're on 5e right now. We've been in 5e for maybe 6 months or so, and it's a welcome change of pace. It's much easier on me. I don't have to know so many things. So I like that a lot. But yeah, I love role playing systems. I guess I'm a collector of core
I
rule
can't
books.
argue with you there. I mean, if you are able to see all the shelves behind me, it would totally work. I've got Fate here and Cipher here and Star Wars there. Got D&D, all taking over that shelf and now moving on with all of the third party stuff. I've got variety of stuff over here as well. So yeah, I totally get it.
Every every system has some little piece of something that's great. Like, even like the Rogue Trader books, I was inspired by how they handle wealth. They turn it into a stat, and that's awesome. Like, you don't have to
The
track your money
the
anymore. You can track your wealth stat. Like every book,
Mutants and Mastermind
that's
does
awesome.
that as well. You have a a wealth score. It's not really a stat, but it's like if you have this, it means this is what you can get, and you can do basically anything up to your level, and if you go like beyond it, like you lessen your wealth score for a certain amount of time, and like it's hysterical, and it doesn't take much to get to the top. It's only a tier 5 system in Mutants and Mastermind. So it's like, oh yes, I want to be a multimillionaire, and like that's what tier 5 is. You're a multimillionaire, if I remember correctly. And like we were playing a game once where it's like, all right, I'm the son of somebody who's wealthy. I've got this super powered suit, and the whole idea was at some point in time in the story, I was just gonna buy that last point. And hey, our company did something really great, and we doubled or tripled or whatever, multiply by 10 our wealth. And it's like, oh, well, we're now more famous because we made a thing. Like,
I'm a big fan of any gaming system that takes some of the inventory management out of the game because, and every gaming circle is different. There are people that love that minutia, but like, my gaming circles have always like been pretty loose with like that kind of stuff,
yeah,
like encumbrance and track wealth. Like that's to me, I've never met anybody that said my favorite part of gaming is like whether I'm like weighed down so much by all the
right.
stuff I'm carrying. Like like a fan of encumbrance. Nobody's like, I really want to make sure that like all my jewels is traded in for the, like
the
that's
only
not
the
great.
only
But
time we get
to
into
me,
that is like when you do something amazing and you take down a dragon and you're like, you've got all of this stuff. There is no way you can carry all of that. Oh, you got a bag of holding, but that only holds 500 pounds, or you can do this or you can do that. But like you're really stuck. You're really limited in those regards, and that's only the times that we ever really get into it in our games. But like
we deal with some of that too, because obviously I'm running 5e. Like money and encumbrance do exist, so like it's there. I don't put a lot of focus on it, but we still run with it because people like
No,
know how much
absolutely.
fun they have on them, and it's just them, so it's there. And I don't have a huge problem with it, but I like to tone it down, or if I can put it in the background, I always will.
So talking about all these different rule sets, if you had to pick a favorite, could you, and if so, what would it be?
Oh, that's tough. I mean, I've my favorite rule set. For me, it's probably thematically. I think Blue Rose is very cool, but it doesn't get played a lot. But I think that my favorite, as far as like workability, what do people know? How quickly can you just jump in and get started? I like it's either going to be Genesis or 5e. Those two are the barrier for entry is low for new players. It's very easy to understand them, um, and that's ultimately what I like. Like when I'm looking for a system to run for players, it's just I want something that's easy to teach, that's easy for them to pick up, that doesn't require a lot of like
Mhm.
math and paperwork and calculate. Both of those systems
Yeah,
do
the
it really,
more
really
the
well.
more the more time I spend playing role playing games, the more interested I am in rules light games or rules light games.
Yeah,
So things like 5e, the cipher
yeah,
system, Fate. These things lend very easily to that. I think Star Wars or Genesis and Mutants and Masterminds, they have another level to get into, but are still
yeah,
pretty easy. And I would enjoy playing any of those things. And I'm willing to give anything a shot once. And sometimes it's
yeah.
forget about the rule system. Sometimes it's just I want to get into role play, and you can do that in any game.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree with you, and I definitely agree that Genesis takes the complexity up one level because there's a lot of like customizability there with where you go with a lot of your stuff. So I like for people to have some options, but like again, Pathfinder was hard on me. That was just a rough system that required so many books, and I was really lucky to have so many 3.5
Mm.
players that were in my group that were able to kind of carry some of that. But it's a lot of math, and I was not a great math
Well,
student. So
I was good at math. I liked math, but to me, I don't know. Pathfinder just had too much going on, too many options, and there is that essentially that paywall that if you don't have all those books and you didn't get in at the beginning, it gets more and more difficult because oh well, this person over here is a more experienced player, and you're playing something out of the core book, but three editions later, there's this other thing here that does essentially what you were going to do, but so much better.
well, there's a lot of power creep in a way, and that's something you expect to only exist kind of in like tabletop, wargaming. But like Pathfinder had it, like if you just wanted to be a basic fighter, and somebody else came to the table with like their arcane barbarian, arcane ranger from one of the other things, like you're just straight overclassed. You can hit stuff with a sword, and that guy can put a fireball in his sword. But like what are you doing? You should have picked that. So yeah, I don't like that. I mean, I always think like the core choices in most books are the stuff that the system is telling you, like this is what you should play, and when everybody's showing up at the table and nobody's picking a core class, like something's wrong. Like they didn't do something right, or they
Right.
forgot about that.
and that
In
and that's one of the things that I love
system.
about 5e is like they're not going away from those core classes. You have options for what archetypes or what subclasses you want to choose, but at its core, you're still one of those 12. You're still one of those things that everybody gets, and the majority of what your class is out of your core. Your overall theme and how you enact with it is going to be off of that archetype. But
Yeah, completely agree. And I was just looking through like Xanathar's actually yesterday. One of my players is a fighter, and I was looking at like one of what some of those subclasses are, and you're right. You get a few little things here and there from your subclass, but like ultimately your main class is what's supplying you with the cool
Hmm.
level to level advancements, and it's great. It keeps stuff important that's supposed to be important,
And
and I appreciate
realistically, the
that.
only things that are potentially out in the works are the Artificer and the
Mhm.
Mystic, and that's so that we can see Eberron and we can see Darksun. And, you know,
Yeah. I'm excited for the little bit of chatter that's been out there about bringing psionics in, just because like I started the game in like advanced Dungeons and Dragons when psychics was a thing and a
my
mess,
my
but
my first
you
character
know
in the Nerdarchy group was a Dark Dwarven Psionicist, so I definitely have a desire to see what happens with that in its end. Now, I'm not going to be able to portray Grevin the Beardless One the way he was played back in the day, before he was ultimately killed by some evil wizard. Maybe it was a good wizard because he was evil, but either way. Uh,
well, you had it coming then. So, but yeah, there's a nostalgia thing there for me to see psionics brought back in, and in Morden Canaans, there's a couple hints to that here and there that maybe they're coming back. I think the gift gets some mentions in there, and like some of their spells are called psychics, and also there's a few call outs to Spelljammer, which I'm super excited about. That was like something I never got
mhm.
the opportunity to run when I was in it, but I always wanted to, and awesome. I mean, there's Griff in that book. There's like a Griff in that book. It's a hippopotamus with a gun, and that's great. I mean, that's everything I love about life right there.
When you can play a game where there's a hippopotamus with a gun, it's just silly enough to be like, damn it, that would work. We've
Role
played
playing.
Spelljammer for a number of years as our Thanksgiving game. So like we
That's
just
awesome.
play it once a year. We have a lot of fun with it. We've got a spell jamming game going on Fridays now for the last you know 2 months or so. So that's been a lot of fun. Our Nerdator Doug runs that. So
I I'm glad you mentioned like holiday games. Those are always fun. I would sometimes think I'm only the only one that ever runs like holiday themed games and stuff. Like around Christmas, I'll do like a Christmas game and stuff like that. That's great. Our recent D&D RPG, we had a Christmas game that was meant to be fun, but I think I accidentally killed one of the characters. It went on like a 3 session side quest to bring him back because magic
oh
is so
wow.
rare in my setting. But like that was a big oops. That was a little bit of a sidetrack there that I didn't mean for. But the Bay ghost of gifting or whatever accidentally murdered this dwarf, and my bad.
So we got a question from Charles Cole. Do you feel the Mystic is
Sure.
broken? Is it OP or not?
Um, I'm not familiar with the Mystic in D&D 5e. Unfortunately, I just haven't seen that class yet. I know the Mystic from Pathfinder, and if they're similar, um, I would say yes. But to me, Ivy hasn't done anything that's broken yet. So at the moment, I trust those guys. Like everything they put out, I have like an inherent trust for. With whereas like with the new stuff with Pathfinder, I had this more like a feeling of like, well, let me take a look and see what's wrong with this. But yeah, I trust everything that they're putting out. Like they recently put out like those rules for
Mm-hmm.
like Centaur and Minotaur, which like that immediately raised my like, oh, this is going to be insane, right? These are huge creatures with giant challenge ratings. But I looked at it and they did
Yep.
it reasonably, right? Like they created reasonable versions of a Minotaur and a Centaur, and that's great. It's awesome. So I trust these guys. They even came up with like explanations for like how does a Centaur get up a ladder and like stuff.
Yeah, that was one of my
Did it?
questions as well. Was like, are you serious? Centaurs and ladders, they really shouldn't get along. Like they're not friends.
How is Centaur gonna dungeon? How is he gonna climb up a grappling hook? But like they're doing it, and I really think that like the guys for 5e kind of understand that like they understand the differences between their product and like Paizo's product, and they make things fun at the table and they make it work. And not to trash Paizo, because again, I own every single one of their books. I've given them my money, but like they have a different kind of like a different customer. They're going after somebody that really likes the minutia and customizability, and but unfortunately, they have too much stuff to really make it
It,
balance
it
with
comes
everything.
down to like I'm not going to be someone to say that you're having fun wrong. if Pathfinder is a game for you,
Yes.
then by all means, go play it, have fun, roll dice, and get into that layers of the game. To me,
Yeah.
it's too much. I like the
Yeah.
DM having far more control. I think third edition and 3.5, which is what Pathfinder is built on,
Mhm.
really truly bred what we all know and despise as the rules lawyer. And when there's a rule for
Yes.
everything, it's very easy for someone to be like, but it says right here I can do this or they can't do that. And the DMs then have to argue and yell at, discuss this, whatever you want to call it. Whereas, 5e, it's
Yeah.
like, look, DM's in charge, they have final arbitration, and we're not going to make a rule for everything. You do what you want to do in your game,
Yeah.
and let the DM make the decision whether you can or can't.
I agree. I've always been somebody that's put story like way first above of rules, and that's just me as a storyteller. What I like rules come a very distant second. But the thing for me that was hard about Pathfinder, and I know I keep harping on it, but like as a storyteller and a DM, it's very difficult to write a story that works because you don't necessarily know what all of your players can do. There's so many paths that they could go down and so many options and customizability that it's very difficult to write a story that's effective for everybody when you're not going to know how to challenge them properly because each one of them has like 3 or 4 pages worth of special abilities and modifiers and whatnot that like I don't know if I'm overdoing it or underdoing it when I put together an encounter. Whereas in IV, it's easier for me to know if I'm doing a good job or not. Um, I don't. I
Cool.
like it. I like
All
it
right,
right
so
now.
we only got a few more minutes left. So I'm gonna say, since you've been playing, in Star Wars and you know something about Genesis, do you mind if I pick your brain on that system? All right, so
Please
Star
go ahead.
Wars, you've got the three core books, many different, supplements and
Mhm.
adventures and what have you, and I've played in several campaigns, short run, and it's all about these,
Mhm.
essentially, skill paths or skill trees to build your character. Is Genesis built off of that same engine? Do you pick like I'm this class and you have this tree of essentially powers and skills that you can select?
Yeah. So Genesis is definitely it doesn't have those in there. It has some of that, but that book is really, I said it before, but it's a box of Legos for you to build how you want. It's basically like how to go about doing your own skill trees if you want to do that, or how to kind of let the players go about doing that. So it's very open ended in that aspect. Um, but really one of the things that I say, if somebody likes Genesis and they like the idea of having those career paths, really just grab one of the Star Wars books and run with that and just kind of reskin everything to be in your setting because that takes a lot of the rules development off of you if that's just not something you want to do, right? So like if you grab Edge of the Empire and now your mechanic is your artificer in your fantasy setting, or your soldier is whatever, and just follow those trees and make it work. I think that, if anything, is a great way to go about handling Genesis. Like if you don't have the time to develop everything that you need to develop as a player. I think the one thing that if you were running Genesis, that I would always snag from the other systems is Edge of the Empire's obligation system, because that is such a great storytelling tool for you as the game master. Um, I love that system. The Rebellion one for
Mm-hmm.
duty is pretty good too. It gives your group a cohesiveness that maybe sometimes a group of players doesn't bring for themselves, right? So, a lot of times you'll tell your group of players like, hey, if you're coming to the table, figure out a reason to know each other and maybe like each other a little bit. But obligation and duty from those two systems do that for you, and they give you actual like somewhat mechanical, somewhat story benefits for adhering to that. I love that. I
My
think that's great.
my my what do you call it? My path through playing Star Wars
Mm-hmm.
is very different than other people's. When most people play, say like D&D, they single class, they stick on one thing, and they go. Maybe every so often there's a dip, but I would hazard to say that most people stick to that. I don't know what the typical run through of Star Wars or Genesis looks like, because my experience has been all over the place. My first
Yeah.
character, the GM gave us loads of XP as we played, and I was on like five or
Sure.
six different trees by the end of it. I had a couple force
Wow.
powers. I was a bounty hunter. I had force powers. I was a force adept in the middle, or whatever it was called, like force sensitive emergent. Um, it was like I'm all over the place, and I'm like, I don't want to do that. I just want to be a thing. I played a few sessions
Uh-huh.
with one GM, and I'm like, I'm just an engineer. I'm just an engineer, and I did, and I stuck with it.
Mhm.
But we only played a few sessions before that game kind of like fell to the wayside, and he started a new game, that we've been recording here, and I'm back to being all over the place. So like, I have to avoid
Yeah.
being a Jedi so that I can stay
For
on one thing.
Same for us. I mean, my play group, of the 7 people that were players, I think there was only one person that deviated, and a lot of the guys that I'm playing with, like they're when we did do Star Wars, specifically Star Wars, like none of their favorite things was the Jedi stuff. They always just liked all the other like aspects of the world. So we never had like anybody playing a Jedi. We had like one NPC who had some force powers that she couldn't control, which was cool. But for the most part, it was just them running from bounty hunters, running from this trade federation guy that was after them. He's like the last trade federation guy on his, Blue Creole cruiser, and you know they worked for him, and now they're on the run from him. So crime, the crime aspect of Star Wars is what everybody really liked, and then some of the rebellion stuff and the actual like day-to-day soldiering. That's
And you
what
can
we
have you
focused
can
on.
have an absolute blast and a lot of fun, running it that way. And it's like that's got to be the next Star Wars game that I do. It's got to be, let's shift, let's push the Force stuff away. Nobody's gonna touch that stuff, and maybe I can have a successful game where I just stay on one little path and become really good at something, as opposed to just being I'm all over the place.
Yeah, no, that's great. I'm super behind that stuff. That's the kind of Star Wars games I would like to play in. The Force stuff gets in the way for me, and every Force user always wants to be the center of attention in there, But no, we love the crime stuff. We love the the good, the bad, and the ugly kind of games, the shootouts. That's the good stuff to me when it comes
All
to
right,
Star
so
Wars.
we've kind of gone all over the place from steampunk, Ironrise, Genesis, D&D, variety of different other role playing stuff. So let's do one final pitch. Get people to go check out your Kickstarter and get them to help us unlock some more stretch goals.
Sure. So, guys, yeah, we definitely would love to have your help. I mean, all of our stretch goals are quality improvement goals. We really believed in giving everybody the whole game and not kind of dangling characters over your head for extra money. So, you get everything that we have. We just want to make it better, and that's what those stretch goals are for. But the game itself, I mean, it's this great steampunk horror, Lovecraftian, dystopian piece that we're all really, really proud of. I mean, if you love a game that's somewhat cooperative, team v team, managing a hand of cards to accomplish your tasks, unique characters with unique abilities, please check it out. Check out our models on there. It's all great photorealistic art that we had a great team of people do. So please just give us a look, drop some comments, and if you really feel like it's something you want to own, pledge, back
So
us,
I'll
help
go
us
one
out.
step further. Whether you like it or not, share it around so that your friends have a chance to see this campaign. It really looks like it's going to be something fantastic. And I don't know what your plans are, so mayhaps Kickstarter is the only way that you're going to be able to get it. So go ahead and back it. Chris, I want to say thank you so much for hanging out with us the last hour or so. So for you guys out there, until next time, stay nerdy.
Cool.
Why is this not stopping?
Machines.